In this chapter, we'll be discussing consciousness and some of its variations. So first of all, before we start looking at consciousness and its variations, I think we should discuss a definition of it. And so consciousness has been determined to be personal and immediate awareness of mental activity, internal sensations, external stimuli in the world around you, and planning or active problem solving. So, throughout the evolution of psychological studies of consciousness, William James, as you remember from earlier discussions, he was one of the first and foremost, American psychologists. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, he determined that consciousness occurs in a constant stream of activity, and he called that stream of consciousness, which is, for some of you who may have heard that phrase, that's where it comes from, William James. Okay, we're going to shift gears slightly and talk about attention. So what is attention? So some of the characteristics of attention are, that it has a limited capacity. Attention is selective, which means, that we tend to pay attention to what we feel is most important or most salient to the current situation. And attention can be both blind and deaf. So what does that mean? Well, our attention, because it is so selective, other things that we are, we might be, slightly aware of, but just not registering at the time, we can actually be blind and deaf to them. So we may not see or hear certain types of information and data coming into our receptors. So take, for instance, in this picture right here, did you even notice the clown riding the unicycle right here? So that's what they mean, for those of you who did not, and you just look at the overall picture, of people sitting around outside, that just shows, that, our attention can be, blind. So that's just an example. Okay, and when we are conscious, we tend to also engage in what we call multitasking. And for those of you who have never really defined multitasking, it just means doing two or more things at once. And so that actually involves, really rapid division of one's attention. And you may have even heard of the argument that actually multitasking really is not a thing. It really does not exist in and of itself. And what they mean by that, people who make that argument, is really what happens when we are multitasking is that we're tending to very rapidly shift our attention from one thing to another. We're never really just doing two things exactly at once. We're constantly shifting our attention, which, makes it very difficult, and very risky, while, take, for instance, driving, and using our cell phone, that kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to shift gears again, and we're going to just take a look at, some of the biological and environmental things that regulate our consciousness. And we call those things clocks, at least in this discussion. So basically, a couple of important points here, each day our consciousness, it constantly ebbs and flows in a natural rhythm, which means, sometimes, we are really alert and fully, we feel like we're fully conscious and aware, whereas other times, we feel a little less conscious, we're just not, is aware of things, and we might even feel a little sleepy or something. And that's due to our natural rhythmical cycles. And as this, note right here indicates, there can be up to, or more than 100 processes, that peak and dip, all throughout the day, so just, be aware of that. And last but not least, as I mentioned, these clocks, that regulate our consciousness, that we ebb and flow throughout the day. Those are actually called circadian rhythms. Right here, circadian rhythms. Now, we will discuss circadian rhythms as we progress through this conversation. So here's just some examples of human circadian rhythms, like what one might experience throughout the day. I'm not going to read all these, but feel free to, pause the video, take a look at these, gain a little bit more insight into these. Okay, so first of all, how do circadian rhythms even occur in our, let's just say our mind? But really, to tell you the truth, circadian rhythms actually originate within our brains and certain structures within our brains, which cause us to become aware of those rhythms, hence our, what we call our minds. Okay, so first of all, circadian rhythms, they actually are triggered by and regulated by what's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So here is the word right here. I know that's a mouthful. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay. And that's basically, our body clock. And so what that happens is, according to the amount of light that enters our eyes right into here, and then our suprachiasmatic nucleus, takes in that incoming data, how much light, how much darkness, and then triggers the pineal gland to develop what's called melatonin. And melatonin is what causes us to feel sleepy, get prepared for sleep, our sleep cycle. So what happens is, like take for instance in the morning when we see that it's starting to get light outside, when we start to feel ourselves waking up, what happens is our suprachiasmatic nucleus triggers our pineal gland to start producing less melatonin. So what happens is we start to wake up. And so that in a nutshell, that's how our circadian rhythms function. Okay, so feel free to, pause the video once again and take a look at these here. And we are going to move on. So as in the previous slide we discussed, well, our suprachiasmatic nucleus, it tends to respond to incoming light, that our eyes perceive, right? Our eyes receive the information, and then our brain actually perceives, it actually processes the incoming data. But what about, individuals who are blind, and they actually do not sense incoming light in their eyes? So what happens is they experience what's called desynchronized circadian rhythms. So, they can, don't know whether it's day or night, and they can, their circadian rhythm cycles can be out of sync with, most people, who are able to sense incoming light. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, don't worry so much, about all of this information here, about the scientific information. What's really important to know from this left hand side right here of this slide, is that the brain does remain active during sleep. We don't become unconscious. We just, our consciousness changes during sleep. And that's what the point of all this is, okay? Now, on the right-hand side of this here, there are two basic types of sleep. What we call REM sleep, which really stands for rapid eye movement. That is associated, that's the kind of sleep that's associated, what we experience while we are dreaming. And that is our deep sleep. But non-rapid eye movement, what we call NREM sleep, that can actually be, that's more of a quiet type sleep, and that can be divided into 4 stages, which we will look at those stages as we progress here. So just be aware of those 2 basic types of sleep. Okay, and another thing to be aware of, what's important about this, and what I'd like for you to know, is the 2 types of brainwave patterns when a person is awake. And so first of all, beta brainwaves. That is when we are the type of brainwaves that we experience when we are fully alert, fully awake. Okay, so that is beta brain waves. On the other hand, alpha brain waves, that's when we are more just relaxed, but we're still awake, but we're starting to get near drowsiness. So what can occur during when we have alpha brain waves is different, let's just say, types of things that occur while we are still conscious. And so right here, we actually discussed some of these on the right-hand side here. We have what's called hypnagogic hallucinations. Okay, sometimes, when we're about to fall asleep, some of you will notice that you will have a sensation of falling, and then your body will jerk, and that will kind of briefly wake you up again, and you say, wow, what happened? Well, that's just a very common reaction to what occurs as our brainwaves are starting to change, getting ready for sleep. Another thing we might experience during non-rapid eye movement type patterns is, we'll start rewinding the daily activities and things that we are preoccupied with throughout our day. So those of you, who are about to fall asleep, you'll notice that when you are about to fall asleep, that sometimes you will start replaying things or start thinking about important things of the day, or things that are on your mind. Well, that's very common, so do not worry about that. It's a very common part of that type of brainwave activity. And other things, other things that one might experience are like feelings of floating, flying, seeing patterns, kaleidoscopic patterns, or et cetera, just some examples. Okay, so let's not belabor this point. Let's move on just a little bit. So I just want to show you exactly, briefly what happens during the sleep patterns here. Okay, during as the brain changes. So we've got our beta brain waves when we are fully awake and alert, but then we start moving downward. We start moving into alpha brain waves. And then we go downward a little bit more into stage 1. Remember, there are 4 stages of non-rapid eye movement sleep, NREM sleep. Stage 1, you see right here, when we start to experience a mixture of brain waves. And then we get into stage 2. We go in a little bit deeper. Okay. We get into what's called theta brain waves and beginnings of delta waves. We get into stage 3. We go a little bit deeper. Okay. And then we get into theta, and delta brain waves again. And then we get into stage 4. And so you can see we start progressing downward, where our activity, our brain waves start getting slower, getting further apart. You see these waves that get further apart right here compared to these are actually very close to each other. So that's something important to understand. Then we will experience what's called rapid eye movement sleep. And that's when the body might kind of twitch a little bit. The eyes might start flickering, rapid eye movements. And you notice right here, the brain peaks again. And, and so these are fast, active brain waves. And this is when we start dreaming. Okay. And so the brain becomes very active, somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes is how long our rapid eye movements sleep pattern lasts. Now you can see that basically what occurs is we tend to repeat this pattern hopefully at least 5 times during a normal night's sleep. Okay, so we will progress through all stages of non-REM sleep and then get to REM sleep, and then we will start over again. And we will go through this process again. And hopefully in a good night's sleep, we will do this at least 5 times. And these are just our, our 90-minute cycles of sleep, as I discussed in the previous slide. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hopefully, when we get our best night's sleep here. Okay, now what happens, when we are sleep deprived, and so here's just an example, for sleep deprived adolescents. So our circadian rhythms, they shift during adolescence, when we are in high school, and even junior high and everything. And, adolescents, they tend to fall asleep later on, and then they tend to wake up later. And that is a natural part of their circadian rhythms. But unfortunately, because they have to get up really early for school and things, and other things that they may have to get up early for, they actually become sleep deprived. And sleep deprivation, that can result in, poor school performance, increased risk of accidents, injuries, and even maybe experience depression. Okay, so let's shift gears here and let's just, think about why do we sleep? And so here is right here on the left-hand side, here are the most important reasons why we sleep. And something that's really important to, if you'll remember from a previous chapter when we were discussing neuroscience, but during sleep, actually, what happens is our brain actually clears out metabolic waste products. So all throughout the day, when our brain is very active, our metabolism, is regulating that. And as it's just like an engine or something that is releasing exhaust, or waste products, well, our brain does that too. And if we get good sleep, we will, actually the glial cells, if you remember those from our neuroscience chapter, those actually clear out the metabolic waste products while we are asleep. And that is very important for our brain health. Okay, so a couple other reasons why sleep is important. Number one, maintaining our immune function. Number two, and this is very important, but definitely it facilitates our learning and our memories, formation of our memories. And we will talk about that in just a little while. And last but not least, it regulates our mood. Those of you who experience sleep deprivation, you may notice that you feel a little more moody on after nights where you didn't sleep very well. You just feel a little more, either sad or edgy, snapping at, people, that kind of thing. So just be aware of, why that may have occurred and how that occurs. Okay, moving on. So we talked about sleep and memory, and so I just want to take a look at a little more in depth into that. So first of all, non-REM sleep. During non-REM sleep, that's when we start to actually form our new memories. Things, and some of those memories are called episodic memories. And those are memories of things that have actually happened throughout the day. And so our brain starts to actually codify and store those in certain parts of our brain. And that way we can start to make sense. We put things, into categories, and we start to make sense of what occurred throughout our day, hopefully. Well, it's during non-REM sleep that occurs. Now, REM sleep and stage 2 of non-REM sleep, that's when we consolidate procedural memories. And procedural memories, means the types of memories while we learned a new skill or task, until those can be performed automatically. So that can be anything from work type skills, sports related type skills. It can be like if you are learning to play the piano or something and you're learning a new piece of music. Well, during stage 2 non-REM sleep and your REM sleep, that's when you're starting to consolidate your memories of your practice time. And so hopefully the next day you'll wake up and you will think like you will see the results of your practice efforts. Okay, and we're going to move on here. So just for a little more insight into the effects of sleep deprivation, so what happens after one night of sleep deprivation? Well, one might experience what's called microsleeps. That means when one falls asleep very briefly for maybe a few seconds all throughout the day. And especially when one is sitting, definitely when one is sitting and being inactive, one might briefly fall asleep and then suddenly jolt back to being awake. Well, that's called microsleeps. And one might experience, as I mentioned earlier, disruptions in mood, mental abilities, reaction time, etc. After several nights of sleep deprivation, right here, that can actually cause us to, once we do sleep, we actually start to make up for that lack of sleep by as much as 50% more REM sleep in our sleep cycles. Okay, and that's just something to be aware of there. We won't elaborate too much into that. And then sleep restriction. Here's just a bunch of things that happen right here. So please pause the video, read through these, gain a little more insight, and we will move on. Now, we did mention earlier, that we looked at the fact that when we are sleep deprived, we tend to be a little more emotional. Well, what neuroscientists have discovered is because there's more stimuli. The amygdala, you remember from our neuroscientific studies that the amygdala is a structure of the brain, the structure of the brain right here that's associated with basically emotional type responses to stimuli. So right here's what's the average brain after a good night's sleep, and you can see right here that the amygdala right here is slightly stimulated. It's having an emotional reaction to what's going on in the environment. But the sleep deprived brain on the right hand side, one can see right here that the amygdala are highly stimulated, see very active right here. Hence the increased emotional type responses that occur during sleep deprivation. Okay, so let's shift gears here and let's talk about dreams, because this tends to be a very popular topic during, amongst my students and classes, and people are very interested in, dreams, and they'll ask things like, well, do dreams really have meaning? Do dreams, have deeper meanings? Do dreams have symbolic meanings? Things of that effect. And I'm not going to try to convince you of anything, answers to those, specific hard, fast answers. But I will just give you some information on that, okay? So first of all, a dream. That's basically a sequence of perceptions, thoughts, and emotions that one experiences as a series of actual events during sleep. So, we experience those as things that actually occurred, but they really had just happened, within our certain level of consciousness that we were engaged in while we were at that phase during our sleep. Okay, now sleep thinking right here, that's also known as sleep mentation. That occurs during non-rapid eye movement, slow wave sleep, and that's, very vague, bland, thought-like ruminations about real-life events. So we discussed that in an earlier slide, but I just want to remind you of that. So that's what occurs. That's not quite dreaming, really, but it's more like sleep thinking. Okay? All right. And here are just some common dream themes. So feel free to pause the video, take a look at these, see if you've experienced any of these, or maybe think about maybe some common dream themes that you experience, things like that. All right. Now, in relation to dreams, we'll take a brief look at nightmares. What are nightmares? Those are very vivid and usually very frightening or unpleasant anxiety dreams during REM sleep. And so, here's just some brief statistics, that's most common during middle and late childhood, experienced by about 10% of adults on a weekly basis, most frequently reported by women than men. And usually those are associated with, daily stresses, anxiety, and emotional difficulties that one might be undergoing in life or in their daily type activities. Now, those are slightly different from night terrors. Just wanted to make you aware of that. We are going to move on. Okay. So one well-known researcher, that in psychology that got known for his research on dreams and his preoccupation with, discovering, if dreams have a meaning, if what occurs during one's dreams, etc., was definitely Sigmund Freud. And so he, iterated that dreams, they tend to function as psychological safety valve for the release of unconscious and unacceptable urges. So he felt that, it was our unconscious and unacceptable urges that we tend to have, in the deep recesses of our minds, our unconscious minds, that are coming out during our dreams. So, he also felt, that, our dreams, were more often than not, they were, the result of frustrated sexual and aggressive wishes, and they, expressed symbolically in our dreams, so I just want to, pause here briefly and just remind you that I'm just telling you about the, some of the preeminent and researchers and what they proposed in regard to dreams, and I'm not saying that this is the actual what psychologists and researchers now know as the truth or feel the truth to be. Okay, now these two researchers, you do not have to memorize their names or anything, but there's what they proposed, what they came up with, what's called the activation synthesis model of dreaming. And they basically just said, look, our brain activity during sleep, it produces the dream images, and that is called activation. Okay. And then those are combined by the brain into a story. And that is called synthesis. So the production of the dream images, that's called activation. And then the combining of all those images into a story, that's called synthesis. Hence, the activation synthesis model of dreaming. So you can see right here, comparing this, type of model to Freud's model, is Hobson and Carley, in their model, they said, look, brain activity produces dreams, not, unconscious type, and unexpressed type wishes, active, things like that, so just understand the difference between those. And let's go a little further on the Hobson and McCarley, model right here. They also were able to determine that dreaming is due to the automatic activation of brainstem circuits at the base of the brain. So that's what's important right there. There's the neurophysiological explanation right there of why dreams occur and what causes dreams to occur and how they occur. And that is the activation of brainstem circuits at the base of our brain. Okay, moving on here. So some basic theories of dreaming, discussing, the neurocognitive theory of dreaming. So dreaming is basically, what neurocognitive type psychologists, how they think of dreaming. They say dreaming is, basically thinking under conditions of reduced sensory input in the absence of voluntary control. So basically we dream, dreaming is like thinking while we have reduced sensory input. So we, experience while we, are asleep, what is known as called sleep paralysis. So our bodies are kind of paralyzed, generally speaking. And so we have a reduced sensory input. And then our brains become very active during REM sleep. And so they'll start creating a synthesis of imagery, and which it becomes dreaming. Okay, let's move on to discuss sleep disorders. So 7 out of 10 people experience sleep disruptions. Okay, but disruptions, they actually can become sleep disorders if those sleep disruptions become consistent. Like one experiences them on a regular basis, okay, and that starts to become a sleep disorder. That can cause feelings of distress, and it can interfere with one's daytime functioning, okay. And so there's a few different categories here, and we'll look at a couple of them. Categories of sleep disorders. They are known as dysomnias and parasomnias. So we will discuss those right here. So first of all, dysomnias. Those are, basically mean disorders involving disruption in the amount, quality, or timing of sleep. Okay, so that's what's important to know about dysomnias. It's, one's amount, quality, and timing of sleep are disrupted and altered a bit, modified a bit. So things like insomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy, those are examples of dysomnias. So please pause the video, read through these here, just become, familiar with these, and we will move on here. So the other type of sleep disorder is known as a parasomnia. Now what those are, parasomnias, basically is undesired arousal or actions during sleep. So that's the brain is partially awake, and that occurs usually in our non-rapid eye movement stage of sleep, the third stage there, stages 3 and 4, and during the first half of the night. And things like genetics, age, and also just a bunch of other stimuli that can trigger that, causes that. But some examples of sleep disorders known as parasomnias are sleep terrors, sleep sex, and sleepwalking and sleep eating. So pause the video here, take a look at those, become familiar with those. Okay, so we'll move from discussion of sleep to the discussion of hypnosis. This is always a very interesting topic and to discuss as well. So first of all, what's important to realize about hypnosis is psychologists have defined this as, and I put this in red for you, it's a cooperative social interaction. That's very important to understand, because the person that is being hypnotized, they are cooperating with what's going on, which is the social interaction between the hypnotist and the person being hypnotized. Okay. Now that's important to understand because, to be honest, things like being hypnotized against one's will, or being hypnotized to believe that you are something different than you are, like take for instance, being hypnotized, that you are now a billy goat, or something like that. That's actually not proven to be, realistic. Okay, so usually, hypnosis, I'm not saying hypnosis isn't true, but just common misconceptions about it might not be true. Okay, so let's move on from this. So here are some of the limits and applications of hypnosis. Okay, so as a reminder, people cannot be hypnotized against their will. It cannot make people perform actions contrary to their morals or their values. And it cannot make people stronger than their physical capabilities or bestow new talents. So, take for instance, a woman cannot all of a sudden be hypnotized to lift a car over her head. She's suddenly strong as a result of her hypnosis, that effect. That's just, not found to be true. But on the other hand, there are benefits to hypnosis. And, so take for instance, hypnosis can be very common, like in sports psychology, helping others or aiding people to overcome addiction, like cigarettes or alcohol or something to that effect. Those are some of the ways that hypnosis can be beneficial. So hypnosis can enhance physical skill or athletic ability by increasing self-confidence and concentration. So that's basically means that hypnosis can help one to become self-confident and increase their concentration by forming a very detailed picture in their minds, and then going over and over that picture, and will actually result in increased myelination of those neural pathways, which will result in increased performance. All right. Now we'll take a look, since we are discussing different types of consciousness, we will take a look at meditation. So for those of you who have used meditation, practice meditation on a regular basis, you may have experienced, like different levels, or I really don't like to use that term level, but I do maybe like to use different types of consciousness, different, types of consciousness, but during intense meditation. So, meditation basically involves any one of a number of types of concentration techniques that help us to focus and heighten our awareness. Okay, so those, one thing that's important to realize is meditation isn't necessarily religious. This doesn't mean, meditation has been found to be very beneficial to the actual neurophysiological structures in the brain. And it has nothing to do with religion, and it just has to do with practice and the benefits of meditation. So basically, meditation is basically controlling or training one's attention. And so here are some different categories right here, and we don't have to worry about these as much. So, neuroscientists have done studies of people who have practiced meditation on a regular basis and have practiced meditation over an extended period of time. And they have determined that, not only have they, have improved concentrations and attention spans and things, but, actually, brain waves can, definitely be changed through meditation, so it's definitely, increased working memory, improved emotional control, well-being, stress reduction, etc., etc. So those are just some of the benefits of meditation. Okay. Extending our discussion here about different types of consciousness. So psychoactive drugs can alter one's type of consciousness that one is experiencing. So there are a few broad categories of psychoactive drugs. There are depressants, and those that depress or inhibit brain activity. There are opiates, and they are chemically similar to morphine and relieve pain and produce euphoria. There are stimulants, so those stimulate or excite brain activity. And then there are psychedelics, which are drugs that distort sensory perceptions. So in this discussion here, I'm not going to actually examine all of these in depth, but feel free through those slides, that actually discuss these a little more in depth, to pause the video and read through some of these for those of you who want further insight into these. Now, one thing that's important to know, though, is the addicted brain. What happens is why addiction occurs. Okay, and so what happens is all the different types of sensory type apparatus in the brain, that receive dopamine levels. Okay, those can actually become kind of worn out. And as a result of becoming worn out, the brain's reward circuitry, the dopamine receptors, those actually start requiring higher doses of types of drugs, and in order to feel quote unquote normal, which is why one will start feeling or experiencing addiction. So here is all the different types of slides here that look at all the different types of drugs. And I highly recommend, you definitely pause on each of these and just become familiar with these. So we have depressants, we have alcohol and inhalants, we've got barbiturates and tranquilizers, we have opioids, more information about opioids. We have stimulants. And just so you know, actually, that the most widely used type of stimulant drug that's actually used in the world is actually caffeine. So for those of you who consume a lot of coffee, definitely feel like you need it to get through your day, well, that kind of explains it a little bit. Okay, so we can just, take a look here, a little more in depth into stimulants, caffeine and nicotine, a little more. Now, what's important to understand, though, that drugs also, especially, like methamphetamines, those can actually erode parts of the brain. So right here, all these areas in red, that's where the brain has actually eroded. And which actually just basically just eats away at parts of the brain. And that's why one, will notice that those who are addicted to, like, say, methamphetamines or something, their personality might change, that their actual functioning of their brains change. Well, this might explain some of that. Okay, so we'll take a look here. Here's a little look here at, like cocaine, psychedelic drugs, more psychedelic drugs, designer drugs. And last but not least, we discussed earlier, about sleep deprivation, and sleep, problems with, having consistent sleep. So we're going to end on just a quick discussion, about maybe some types of strategies, to help us to, at least get a good night's sleep. And so a couple of things to think about. Number one, is definitely monitor stimulant intake. Maybe cut down on caffeine, on the second half of the day and allow the body to start adapting and the brain to start adapting. And let the suprachiasmatic nucleus, start to function normally as the day, as it starts becoming darker in the evening, and start, moving towards sleep. Okay, maybe establish a quiet bedtime routine, instead of being on screen, on a computer or texting, things like that. Watching a lot of TV right before bed. Create the conditions for restful sleep, so definitely, maybe, that's something for you to think about, what helps you to feel most restful. And then maybe last but not least, maybe try to establish, to the best of one's ability, consistent sleep-wake schedule. I know that's hard to do, in real life, but it's just something to think about. So that ends our discussion about consciousness and its variations. So as a reminder, the next step is to get out one study guide that accompanies this chapter. Answer the questions to the best of your ability based upon what you learned from this discussion, from this presentation. And then for questions that you cannot answer, definitely use your textbook, refer to your textbook. And that concludes our discussion. So good luck, and I'll see you on the next presentation.